Welcome back to Sip and Talk. Today we're diving into something that seems pretty ordinary, maybe even mundane, standing in line.
Yeah, queuing. Doesn't sound like the most exciting topic, does it?
Mm-hmm.
But wait till you see how it unpacks some really fascinating cultural differences.
Exactly. We're looking at how this simple act, queuing, can reflect really deep-seated ideas about national behavior, identity, how people see themselves, their country, especially when comparing travelers from, say, Taiwan and mainland China.
Right. And our goal here isn't to judge, but really to explore the observations that have been made, understand the different motivations that might be driving these behaviors.
And see what it all tells us about things like national image, how countries are perceived internationally, sort of unpacking the why behind the what.
Precisely. So where do we start? The basic observation seems to be about differences noticed when people are traveling abroad.
Okay, yeah. So on one hand, we often hear descriptions or see reports of Taiwanese travelers being, well, pretty polite, quiet, following the rules, joining queues properly, respecting local customs.
Mm-hmm. That's the general picture often painted.
Yeah.
And then in contrast, there are these observations about some travelers from mainland China. Not all, definitely not all, but some.
Being noted for maybe jumping queues, sometimes being quite loud in places where quiet is expected, or perhaps ignoring traffic rules or signs. It's presented as a noticeable difference in behavior.
It really is. And what's particularly interesting is that it's not just what they do, but the thinking, the motivation behind the action that seems to differ quite dramatically based on these accounts.
Right. Tell us about the motivation described for many Taiwanese travelers.
Well, it's often framed as this strong sense of representing Taiwan, like an internal monologue of, my actions reflect on my country, I can't lose face for Taiwan.
Huh. It's almost described as kind of a spontaneous civilian diplomacy, like every person feels like a mini ambassador.
That's a great way to put it, spontaneous civilian diplomacy. It's about the individual contributing positively to the collective image. Now, compare that to the reported motivation for some travelers from mainland China in similar situations.
Okay, what's the contrast there?
It's described differently, more along the lines of, I'm Chinese, and in this context, winning means grabbing the opportunity. That's how you succeed.
So less focused on polishing a national image, more on immediate practical gain, maybe seizing an advantage.
That seems to be the core distinction highlighted. It's sometimes linked back to perhaps historical periods of resource scarcity where you really had to be assertive, maybe even pushy, just to get what you needed, a survival tactic almost.
Interesting. And this difference in thinking, it really comes through when criticism happens, right? Like if someone gets called out for queue jumping.
Oh, absolutely. The reported reactions are starkly different. If a Taiwanese person is corrected, the tendency described is towards self-reflection. Maybe an apology. Oh, gosh, I'm so sorry. You're right. My mistake. I represent my country.
There's that link, again, personal accountability tied to national image.
Exactly. Now, for some individuals from mainland China, the described reaction is often quite different. It leans towards defensiveness, maybe even a counterattack.
Less, oops, sorry, and more. What?
More like, who are you to criticize Chinese people? The specific behavior criticism gets escalated almost immediately into accusations of insulting China. That term, ruhua, comes up a lot, or being generally anti-China.
Ruhua, right. So a comment about cutting in line can somehow morph into a national insult.
That's the dynamic described. It completely shifts the focus away from the action itself. And this ties directly into how protecting the country seems to be understood differently.
How so?
For the Taiwanese perspective we discussed, protecting the country seems to start from within, self-restrained. Making sure your behavior reflects well, earns respect. The idea is, I'm not just me right now. I represent Taiwan.
So you protect the national image by being, well, commendable yourself.
Precisely. Now, the style of protection described for some from mainland China seems to start externally. It's about controlling what other people say or think.
You mean trying to stop criticism from happening?
Yeah, essentially. You are not allowed to say bad things about Chinese people.
Mm-hmm.
It's described as stemming from a kind of collective sensitive nerve, possibly instilled through state narratives about national pride and victimhood.
A very defensive posture. Shutting down the conversation before it starts. There were some almost funny examples illustrating this, weren't there?
Yes, quite vivid ones, like the caricature of the Taiwanese traveler diligently practicing English phrases, studying etiquette books, trying so hard not to seem uncivilized.
Or that very relatable one about figuring out the perfect angle to approach the buffet so you don't look greedy or messy.
Right, that intense self-consciousness about being observed. Now, contrast that with the humorous depiction of some more nationalistic travelers from China.
The little pinks, as they're sometimes called online.
Yeah, that group. Their reported attitude is more like, okay, I'm abroad, got to grab what I can. First come, first serve. That's Chinese speed.
Chinese speed. Wow. So turning what others might see as rule-breaking into a point of nationalistic pride, almost a virtue.
Kind of reframing it, yeah. And if someone dares to point out, hey, maybe that's not the way to do it here, the described response can be instant defense. How dare you say Chinese people have low standards? That's insulting 1.4 billion people.
Whoa, there's that immediate jump again. From a specific behavior to defending the entire population, it really does short-circuit any real discussion, doesn't it?
It's a very effective way to shut things down. Now, underneath all this, the behaviors, the reactions there, seem to be some deeper social factors at play. Education, for instance.
Ah, okay. What are the suggested differences there?
Well, accounts suggest that education in Taiwan often emphasizes things like mutual respect, people must respect each other, social harmony, that sort of thing.
Okay. And in mainland China?
There, the emphasis described is often much heavier on narratives of national shame, historical grievances, the idea that the West is targeting us, always needing to be vigilant against perceived external threats.
That sounds like it would foster a very different worldview. And it probably shapes where national identity comes from, right?
Seems likely. For Taiwan, it's presented as growing more organically from popular pride, maybe from positive international interactions, being liked or respected, built from the ground up.
Earned respect, maybe?
Perhaps. Whereas in China, the sense of national identity is described as being more heavily shaped by the state, by systemic pressure, by propaganda narratives about strength and past victimhood, less organic, more instilled.
And that difference must affect how people handle criticism from outside.
Absolutely. In Taiwan, there seems to be more societal room, generally speaking, to reflect on criticism, to ask, okay, is there some truth here? Can we improve? Especially if it affects that positive national image they value.
But for some in China, the reaction described is more often a kind of reflexive rejection, like the shutters come down immediately.
Exactly. Criticism isn't just debated, it's often deflected with that nationalistic counterattack we talked about. Now let's dig into that idea of many people mean no rules.
Right, that phrase came up. It's not necessarily saying people are inherently bad, but maybe it's a collective survival strategy.
That's how it's explained sometimes, like collectivism internalized, plus the practical reality that the law doesn't punish the masses. If everyone's pushing, you feel you have to push too, or you get nothing.
It creates this weird dynamic, everyone for themselves, which results in a kind of collective chaos. And in that context, jumping at Q isn't malicious, it's just trying not to lose out. It's how you win.
It becomes a logic for navigating crowded, perhaps resource-scarce environments. A learned behavior pattern. But then take that pattern abroad.
And it causes major friction.
Right.
That displacement idea.
Yeah. Someone says politely, excuse me, the line starts back there, just trying to be helpful.
And it can be instantly filtered through this hypersensitive lens.
Exactly. The reaction described can be anger, defensiveness. What do you mean by that? Are you discriminating against Chinese people? This is how 1.4 billion of us Q.
Which, of course, isn't accurate, but it's that immediate, almost automatic defense mechanism kicking in.
It's been called national self-esteem hypersensitivity. Any perceived slight on behavior gets blown up into an attack on the entire nation.
And this leads to that perceived double standard, right?
Yeah, that's mentioned too. Criticizing another country's government or culture might be defended as free speech.
But criticizing Chinese behavior, even something like littering or, again, queue jumping,
gets instantly slapped with the Ruwa label. It's framed as inherently malicious anti-China.
It sounds, as described, a bit like identity politics used as a shield. You can't criticize my action because of my identity.
It definitely weaponizes group identity in that way. And some suggest that sensitivity is partly a side effect of the information environment back home. Well, if you're constantly hearing narratives like, China has surpassed the world, foreigners admire envy China, and then you travel and see, well, maybe more orderly systems, different rules being followed consistently.
There's a clash, a cultural gap. It could lead to confusion, maybe even a sense of shame, if reality doesn't match the proud narrative.
Right. And to cope with that uncomfortable feeling, the explanation often gets externalized. It's not, maybe our way isn't always best. It's, oh, they don't understand China. or they're just jealous of China's rise. The problem becomes external forces, not internal behavior.
That makes psychological sense. It avoids confronting a potentially uncomfortable truth. And this connects to the bigger picture, the link between national honor and the stability of the party state, right?
Yes, a crucial link. The aim is often described as forging this tight unity. Party equals country equals me. My individual honor is tied to the nation's honor, which is tied to the party's legitimacy.
So it creates a kind of trap.
Exactly. Criticize the party. That's criticizing China. Criticize China. That's attacking Chinese people. Criticize Chinese people's behavior. Yeah. Queue jumping. And boom, it can be instantly framed as ruhua, an attack on the whole interconnected system. It escalates a simple behavioral issue into this huge political, almost ethnic conflict.
Yeah, turning minor incidents into high-stakes battles over national dignity, because it's all tied together in that sensitive framework.
Now, we absolutely need to inject some nuance here. It's critical to state that these are observations and interpretations about some behaviors and reactions. It's not representative of all 1.4 billion people.
Absolutely not. And even the materials discussing this acknowledge internal criticism within China itself.
Yeah.
You see netizens reacting negatively to incidents of bad tourist behavior abroad.
And the government itself has made efforts, right? Issuing guidelines for civilized tourism years ago, trying things like blacklists for disruptive tourists.
Yes, there's definitely awareness and official attempts to address the image issue, even if people debate how effective those measures have been. Okay, so wrapping our heads around all this. Looking at queuing through this complex lens, what can you, our listener, take away from this discussion?
Well, I think one big thing is seeing how profoundly our environment, the history, the education, the political messages shapes our gut reactions, our instincts about rules, about collective identity.
It also maybe helps us appreciate things in our own societies we might take for granted, like maybe spaces where criticism can be discussed without immediately being labeled treasonous, or the value of consistent rules that reduce that feeling of needing to scramble.
Definitely. And it can help build resilience against purely emotional arguments. When you see criticism being deflected by framing it as a national insult, understanding the mechanism behind it, that relay dynamic, that sensitivity helps you see what's happening and not just get pulled into the emotion.
And hopefully it fosters a bit more global understanding, maybe even empathy. Instead of just judging behavior, trying to understand the context that shaped it, the pressures, the narratives.
Yeah, focusing on how people and their reactions are constructed by their environment, not just criticizing the end result. It allows for a more nuanced view.
And interestingly, there are even suggestions on how to discuss these sensitive topics more productively.
Right. Like instead of making blunt accusations, you always jump cues, maybe asking guiding questions. Do you think living in really crowded places might change how people feel about personal space or waiting?
Or framing it from a place of curiosity rather than superiority. Not, we're more civilized, but maybe it's interesting how different cultures handle waiting, isn't it? Focusing on the system, not shaming the people.
Exactly. And maybe even finding common ground, acknowledging similar issues in one's own culture or history can make it less confrontational. You know, we had issues with X behavior during Y period too. It opens a door rather than slamming it shut.
So to wrap up our Sip and Talk today, it's pretty clear that something as simple as standing in line isn't so simple after all. It opens up these complex layers: culture, history, identity, politics.
And the core difference highlighted seems to be in how national image is perceived and protected. Is it through individual self-improvement and earning respect? Or is it more about controlling the narrative and deflecting criticism?
Which leaves us all with something to think about. How much of what we see as just individual choice or personal behavior is actually shaped deeply by the systems and stories we grow up with? And how do those forces mold our gut reactions when we encounter rules or criticism out in the world? Something to ponder.